Good evening, this is Bel Geode, and we are back with some more DCS World 2.1.1. This will not be a full episode. What this will be is a cold and dark start tutorial. I've actually had a number of you ask me for this, so I figured I would take the time right now to do an official cold and dark start tutorial. And I also figured I would use this time to give you a little bit of a teaser as to what's going to be coming next in my DCS World series. So yeah, we're kind of chilling here in Normandy at Les Moulins. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started on our startup. Now, I'm going to try and get through the procedure as quickly as I can from everything that I remember. Bear in mind, I am not a real-life helicopter pilot, so might be on point, might be close to the point, but at least it should be enough for you to be able to get this thing started in DCS. I'm also going to stop at certain points just to explain what I'm doing, whether or not I'm using a left click or a right click. All right, so let's see. We are going to start up here on the overhead panel, and we're going to need this and this, both of these modules, to get started. So the very first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to change the AC voltmeter selector by left-clicking it once to AC phase. To the left of it, you'll notice there is a switch for the inverter. We're going to leave that as it is for now. That'll come in handy once the engine has been started. So we're going to move down to the DC panel, and the next thing that we're going to want to select is the main generator switch. We're going to left-click it once, and I will generally also left-click the cover for it, just to make sure that it's locked down. And then we'll move over to the DC voltmeter selector, and we're going to left click this twice so that it says ESS bus, or essential bus. Next order of business is going to be the battery. Now, just a word of note, when we turn the battery on, it is linked to the low RPM warning horn, which is this switch right here. So as soon as we turn the battery on, we're going to need to turn this off, but you'll hear that in a moment. All right, so battery switch, left click it once. There's the noise I told you about, so we're going to go down here to the low RPM switch and left click it once to turn it off. All right, so that'll take care of that. It is important to note that once we are up to speed and our RPM is in the green arc, as you see over here, this switch that we just flipped off will automatically flip itself back into the up position. So just be advised on that. That is normal. All right, we're going to want to check our caution and warning lights really quick. So this switch here is the test switch and also the reset switch for the master caution and warning. So we're going to left click it once and hold it down to make sure that all the lights come on. Okay, and everything looks good. So we're good to go. We can let go of the switch. All right. Now, at this point in time, what I will usually do, which you do not necessarily have to do, I will usually turn on some of our lights. So you're familiar with the red beacon light or the anti-collision light. That is this switch right here. We're going to left click it once. And I also turn on our nav lights or our position lights. Now, in order to put it to the steady position, you have to right-click it once, and that will indicate that the lights are on. So you should have red and green lights. We can verify this by going outside. Okay, so we have confirmed that they are on. It is, of course, midday, so it's kind of hard to see the lights, but they're on. They're definitely on. Okay, now that we've got that done, we're still going to need to continue with the actual engine start. But before we can get to that, we need to make sure our hydraulics are on. So that is this switch here. We'll left-click on that. Force trim switch in the middle, we're also going to want to left-click on to turn that on. The checklist mentions the chip detector, which is commonly in the both position. By default, DCS World always keeps it in the both position, so you really don't need to do anything with this. So we're going to move down to the fuel panel. The only switch that we need to concern ourselves with is the fuel switch. So we're going to left click that to turn it on. And you'll notice some of the caution and warning lights just disappeared. That again is normal. The checklist will also mention the governor switch, which has to be in the auto position, which is the up position. Again, just like with the chip detector switch up there, DCS always leaves this in the up position, so you really don't need to do anything with it. All right, now that we have that all set up, the next thing that we're going to be operating is going to be the throttle, which is on the collective. The throttle is a twist grip, and you'll notice that the icon is different, indicating that you can use your mouse scroll wheel to turn it on or turn it off, or turn it up and down. What I do in this case is I actually have it bound to a couple of switches on my Saitek X-52. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to pull the throttle all the way up, that is to the left, and when it hits the top position, we're going to pull it all the way back down until it hits the bottom position. Now what that just did, that took our throttle from cutoff position all the way to full and then back to the idle detent position. It has to be in the idle detent position before you can start this thing. So it's important for you to remember to do that, otherwise you won't get an engine start. Speaking of which, it is about time for that. Now, if you're in a mission or, if you're on a server or whatever where they have procedures, also at this point in time, you'd probably want to turn on your radios and get clearance to start up from the tower. Since we're just kind of chilling here on a wharf in Les Moulins, we don't need to do that. So we're just going to do the actual startup. Now, the switch itself is really hard to get to if you're trying to locate it in the cockpit. So what I would recommend is that you bind that to one of your joystick switches. What I've done is I have it on one of my switches on the stick side of the X-52. And I'm just going to run through the procedure real quick as to what we're going to do. We are going to press and hold this switch for about 40 seconds. If you want, you can use the clock down here to time yourself, or a more preferred route would be to watch the gas producer gauge, which is this gauge right here. Just so you're aware, it's marked with percentage marks here. So once we get up past 10%, the rotor is going to start turning. Once we get up to 40%, the light over here that says engine oil pressure will turn itself off. Once that light turns itself off, you are free to release the start switch. All right, let me demonstrate that. So keep an eye on the gas producer gauge right here. And prepare for a lot of noise. Okay, so we're at 10%. Rotor should start turning now. Yep, there we go. Rotor is turning. We're at 20%, 30%, and 40%. Engine oil pressure light has disappeared. We can now let go of the starter. And just like that, we've got a good engine start. We'll also want to close the door because it'll get really loud. Okay, there we go. All right, so now that we have our engine up and running, I'm sure you remember this inverter switch up here. Now is the time to turn that on. So we're going to left click it once. There we go. And now that the inverter is on, we can start turning on our radios. So I'm going to go down the left and down the right to turn everything on. So first we have our IFF radios. We're going to right click on this knob. And then we've got our second radio here. We're going to right click on that. Our third radio, which is the VHF, we're going to right click on that. Then we're going to move down to this panel. We don't need to mess with anything on the left side, but on the right side we're going to right click it once. And then there's this panel, which is the panel that we use to select who we're talking to, whether it's wingman or the tower. Usually in DCS, you want to right click it twice so that it says channel 3. That's the channel for the tower. If you wanted to talk to your wingmen, you can switch it to channel 2 with another right click. If you want to switch it back to the tower, you left click it once. So we're just going to leave it here on tower setting since we don't have a wingman. Moving on to the right side, on this FM comm panel, we are going to right-click once, so it says TR, and then we have the ADF panel. Now, a word of caution, when you right-click on the ADF knob, it's going to make a lot of noise. To turn it off, we use the mouse scroll wheel to scroll to the left. So here we go. Right-click, and then scroll to the left to turn it off. If you want to, if you happen to know what the ADF frequency is for your home base, you can tune that in with this rightmost knob, and it'll actually stop the squelch noise that you're hearing there. And it'll actually pop up on the meter here, so that way you can use ADF to help you with your navigation. However, we don't have a base today, so we won't be using that, so that's fine. The other thing that I like to do, and this is a personal preference for me, doesn't matter if it's broad daylight, I like to fly with the lights on. So I'm going to take the moment here and I'm going to turn on all of our cockpit lighting. And like I said, you do not have to do this, but it's good to know where everything is, especially if you're flying at dusk or at night. Might come in handy for you. While we're up here, another thing to note is the dome lights. You've got two different dome light settings. You can right click it for the white dome light, which is really bright, as you can see, or you can left click it, in this case twice, to get the green dome light. I find the green dome light is a little bit better than the white one. Alright, so we're going to right click it again once to turn it back off. And then the other switch that I tend to forget, which I'm making a point to tell you about right now, is the radar altimeter. So left click on this switch once, and that'll put it to the back position and activate our radar altimeter, which is right here. You'll notice it has two knobs. You've got the low altitude setting and the high altitude setting. For low altitude, generally I will put it to about 50, so use your mouse to scroll up to right about there. If I know I'm going to be flying a little bit higher, I might set it to 100 or maybe even 200. But for the high selection, we're going to use our scroll wheel again. And this time around, I'm going to set it to about 500 feet off the deck. So that will be right there. Okay, so our radar altimeter is set. Now, it doesn't make the usual noises that you're familiar with the radar altimeter, so you got to kind of take a look at it and see whether or not you're high or low. But this little readout, this digital readout with the green 0 will tell you exactly what your altitude is. So that's fine. All right, we're almost ready to go. A couple more things we need to do. First, now is the time that we need to pull our throttle up to full. So you could either scroll over that to the left, or if you have a switch for it, just pull it all the way to the left till it hits the top. Now we're going to watch this RPM gauge. We want both needles to be in the green. And at this point in time, it's definitely going to kick up a little bit of dust if you are not at an airport or on a FARP. I hope I don't lose too much FPS for that. Okay, right there is where it should be. So we're pretty much at the correct RPM in order to fly this bird. The last thing that we're going to want to do here is go back up to the starter gen and switch it to standby. That's a left click on that switch. And since we're going to be moving, I'm also going to take the liberty of changing our position lights. So right now they're set to steady. I'm going to left click twice to put them to flashing mode. So now our position lights are going to flash, indicating that we are going to move. And if you want, you can also turn on the landing lights. That's on the collective here. Right now they are in, so we're going to want to right click on this switch. That'll bring the actual landing light down and forward, and then left click on this switch to turn it on. Always remember, after you take off, turn that switch off. And that's it. The only other thing that we need to do, remember this master caution light? The same switch that we used earlier to test the caution and warning lights, instead of left clicking it, we are now going to right click it. And voila, that gets rid of the master caution warning. If you see this pop up in flight, you might be in trouble. Okay, so just a quick look around. Everything is pretty much set to go. I did not go over any of the weapons panels, which are the two back ones here, nor did I go over the countermeasures panel, which is this one here, because we don't have any weapons or countermeasures on board at this time. But that's basically it. That is how you start the Huey from a cold and dark state. If this was helpful to you, please feel free to give me a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so. This has been Bel Geode. I've been flying in DCS World 2.1.1. I will be back with some more Normandy goodness at some point in time in the near future. Until then, ciao.